Dann darf ich alle recht herzlich begrüßen, online und hier im Belvedere Research Center zu unserem DArtHist Vernetzungstreffen. Und ich wechsle auch gleich zu Englisch, weil unser heutiger Gast in Englisch vortragen wird. So, welcome again online and here at the Belvedere to our presentation organized by DArtHist Austria, the Network for Digital Art History. And before we get to tonight's lecture and presentation and discussion, let me make a few remarks right away. First of all, just save the date for June 12th, which will be our next event, and I'm very happy to have Sandra van Ginhoven, who is working at the Getty Research Institute on the remodel of the Getty Provenance Index. And I think will also be a very important project because it shows a major example of how a database can be transformed into linked open data. And I think it's also a major research for provenance researchers. So I hope next time we will also see some experts in provenance research. Another announcement that I would like to make is that the deadline for the DArtHist Austria Award is still open until June 30. So we, as an association, have created an award that has a call. You can find the call on our website, obviously, and it will also be distributed elsewhere. If you have a great digital art history project, whether it's a practical one or a more theoretical one, so you may consider to submit a proposal. We would definitely encourage you. And the third announcement actually is also please become part of our network, of our association. And now I really come to tonight's lecture, and it's I'm very happy to have here my old friend. It's not that he's old, but I've been knowing him since a very long time, since 25 years, or what did we establish? 15, okay. It feels like 25. But we came together first at Duke University at a research project that kind of tried to connect art market studies and data-driven analysis, data-based analysis. And since then, we had a lot of things in common. Koenraad Brosens is a professor in art history and vice dean of education at the Faculty of Arts, University of Leuven. He has published widely on Flemish and French tapestry and European markets for tapestry. Koen was PI of Project Cornelia, and we will hear some of that tonight, a slow digital art history project developed in close collaboration with the university's computer science department. He's now co-PI of Representation in Image and Art. It's a project that's running until 29. And this project interfaces conceptual and theoretical frameworks and methodologies from psychology, philosophy, art history, and media studies. Koen was a visiting professor at the University of Pennsylvania, the Peter Paul Rubens Chair at the University of California, Berkeley, and the J. Paul Getty Museum Scholar. And in 2019, he was elected member of the Royal Flemish Academy of Belgium for the Science and the Arts. And I now turn it over to here at this point. And tonight, Koen will talk about his experiences with a project that dealt with slow digital art history, and that's why it's called Slow Digital Art History Revisited. So let's revisit slow digital art history. Thank you, Koen.
Thank you, Christian. Thanks for the invitation. Everybody can understand me okay? All right. So yes, I think I have about 16 slides. So I think my presentation will be brief, but then hopefully, and please ask questions along the way or at the end of the presentation. So yeah, what I was asked to do is look back on Project Cornelia. Project Cornelia was, as Christian already mentioned, right, a collaborative project, and I PI'd the project, so I was a principal investigator, always trying to find more money, basically, and I did it with other professors. Fred Ruyen, he's a philosopher. If you do interdisciplinary research, you always need a philosopher, right? Katrien Verbert, she's a professor of in the computer science department, human-computer interaction research. That's her specialty. Katlijne van der Stichelen is a very traditional art historian. Bruno is a postdoc computer scientist. Huda Lamkedam, at the end of the project, got a dual degree. She is now a PhD in computer science and art history. Astrid and Clara were two PhD students from the first group of PhD students. Project Cornelia lasted for 6 or 7 years, depending on how you count time. It's all relative, right? So Astrid and I, we published a lot, but then Astrid decided to become a yoga instructor. So she did not finish the PhD, but she's really happy and probably happier than most of us are today. So that's a very smart decision. Clara finished the PhD, that was on Antwerp tapestry. Jos also finished his PhD. He focused on the Brussels painters in the 17th century. And then Ines also finished the dissertation, and she focused on Antwerp painters and tapestry designers of the 17th century. So that's the whole team. So basically, they did all the work. The overarching research question was, how can we develop a distant reading? So take a bit of distance from the object or the artist, right? Of the socio-economic realities behind hundreds of Flemish baroque paintings and tapestries, and how can that distant reading help us to explain artistic developments? Because in the end, still an art historian, right? And how did we try to approach that question? So what we did is, and I had been doing that for many, many years, doing archival research, right? And so what we all did, except for the computer science people, because they cannot read 17th century handwriting, but they can do a lot of other things that we cannot do. So collecting, modeling, cleaning, and warehousing a wide array of biggish data, not big as in a gazillion of data points, but big as in complex, right? Ambiguous, conflicting, missing, that kind of data is also big data, right? Attribution data, relational data, shedding light on all the people in the artistic communities in Antwerp and Brussels in the 17th century. So what you see on the right is a very simple visualization of the data model. So the actor, the person, is in the center, and what we try to do is, and that's the attribution data, of course, try to find as much as information about this person, but also relational data is important, and then the relation to another actor, to a group of actors, to an artwork, or to a place. So that's a data model. And so I went to the computer science guys and I said, this is what I would like to do. And then they came up with the SQL database that you see over there. It was great fun to do that together because they really couldn't understand sometimes what kind of data they were going to get. And then, of course, once we have the database, what we did is we used, like we all do, I think, but we also asked questions about the existing digital methods and tools. Tools that are there to help us explore and analyze data. Yes, Excel, but also R, of course, Tableau, Gephi, and then Bruno also programmed our very own MySQL interface so that we could write SQL queries. But as all these things exist, right? That's not a... And sometimes they are enough, right? Sometimes they are enough. And then we can, and it's not that question, but a sub-question, of course, like focusing on the Brussels painter. So sometimes it is enough. And we call it slow because, yeah, finding the data, collecting the data, cleaning the data, etc., then trying and exploring all these tools, it takes time. And also because we find it very important. Oh, yep. Well, found it very important to be as clear as possible about the data issues that we are usually dealing with. I'll come back to that in a minute. But sometimes we found that all these tools, which were not developed for art historical questions, of course, that they simply did not do what we wanted them to do. And so then and it was a most fun part of the whole project, then we try to develop new tools, as in prototypes or demos, of course, not fully functional, completely developed tools, that allow us, but also possibly other users, to explore and analyze the data. And so then we started thinking about what kind of user interface, what kind of transparency do we need to bring, or do we need to give to the user, what kind of interaction is needed. So all these simple questions. And so we came up with it's a screen that sort of, cannot see the pointer. See, there is a pointer. And then it isn't there. So on the screen, really, I cannot see it. So it's here, and then it sort of, on the black here on the left, but then it disappears. Oh, so I can only point to the left. Okay. No, but I can point to the right. Is it? Yeah, there. So the first, so that was that was one of the things we developed to show and interact with networks, right? And this is actually, it's a go-between a traditional stamboom family tree, right? But also a dynamic interactive tool that also shows the number of data points that are in the database. So on the far right, you see a timeline. And so you can slide through time. The networks change, and you can see that all the people, they have a lifespan, right? And if you start to move around, the energy level goes up, so to speak. I mean, the bar gets filled, and when the person dies, pop, it becomes gray. So it allows you to see, okay, there is a connection between these 2 or 3 people, but that person was only 7 years old. They're not going to interfere with business strategies, right? It's just, okay, it's a connection, but it's not that connection. There are a couple of small icons identifying activities, but also, so then on the right again, so you have the slider, and then you see yellow dots and a couple of blue dots, right? Possibly other colors, depending on where you are in the database. And these show you the number of data points we have in the database. So if you slide up and go to 1620 and you see something, you basically also see that there is really nothing. There's perhaps 1 connection or 2 connections, and okay, this is a connection, but basically the database is really poor in giving us data. So, and looking back on Project Cornelia, I think that's one of the most, well, no, I'll save it to later, so cliffhanger, stay with me. And then also, that's great fun. We also developed a game of data. So I don't know if you do Minecraft. Somebody? Minecraft? No? Mm. So Minecraft, that's an easy game to play. Basically, it's you. This is you, right? The thing in the bottom right corner, and you walk in a landscape or you create a world because you can mine blocks, and with these blocks you can build a world, and then you can invite other people to. I think Roblox now is something that's quite similar. That might be more, and I think the Belvedere is in Roblox, right? So something very similar where you can basically, and so because writing SQL queries, some people find it difficult. I find it difficult, and a lot of art historians were giving me a lot of grief saying that, but yes, you have a lot of really fun data in the database, but it's not that easy to get it out. I said, you have to learn SQL. But it's too difficult because I'm an art historian. So I said, okay, let's make it a game then. So Bruno and I, we spent a lot of time developing this game where you actually, right, do SQL queries without even realizing that you're doing SQL queries, because you are just like a normal researcher, you embody your research process. That's very important because the computer sort of takes away the things we are used to, touching things and, oh, that's a heavy book. Must be a lot of stuff in there, right? And so you embody, and you know that in the morning, there's a different light coming in the archive. Huh? It's a different experience of reading a document, and then near the afternoon, you're getting tired, and then you start to forget things. And so it's our research is embodied research, right? And so we also try to invite the player or the user of the database to walk through the landscape, right? And then, just like we can do here, you take a book and you think, oh, this is interesting, and you leave it on the table, right? And then you take a piece of paper and you start to write things down. So basically what you're doing is you create some sort of subset, right, of the data that is in the book, and then you take another book. Do we know Hans Mackart? Sure, okay, then we take Hans Mackart. Never heard of. And then you start doing this, and then you go to your nose again and you write it, and then suddenly you have some sort of connection between these two, and the connection is your notebook, right? So but you extracting data from the thing. And so what we did, no, I have to stay here because otherwise people will lose me. What we did is we sort of presented the data as blocks. Then we have a couple of, these are the yellow arrows pointing towards, we call them, no, we had a fun word for them. We call them, no, the mix and the pick and mix blocks. Basically, these are like the Boolean operators and or not, right? So that you go to a block and you ask, or you know that the block, you identify the block, there wasn't identified, and it says, okay, Antwerp painters, 17th century, right? You said, okay, I'm going to see how many of these Antwerp painters ever moved to Brussels, right? So there was a question you could ask. So you picked a Brussels block, you put it next to the Antwerp block, and you put the pick and mix block in the middle, and then whoosh, you had a new subset, right? With all the painters that you were looking for. And that little block, you could use it again to ask many other questions. So that was a really intuitive way of accessing and experimenting with the data without having to learn how to write SQL queries. And of course, now with AI, that whole thing sort of disappears because the AI can really write good SQL queries. And also there was a big thing a couple of years ago with the Sparkle, right? The Sparkle endpoint, and the problem, just ask the AI and you get really nice Sparkle. Right? But still we have a game and that's what counts, right? What we always did, because it's human-computer interaction research, we didn't simply develop the tool or the demo, we always asked users to test it. And then of course the computer scientists, they have protocols, so they know how to do it and statistically valid, etc., etc. So, and like the game of data, for example, we asked 50 people to play with it, and we gave them a set of instructions or questions, right? And then everything was timed, so you could actually see how many mouse clicks and what they did and how long they did. And interestingly, so my son played it and he was, I think, 15 then. So it was really like, because he played Minecraft. So he knew the engine, so to speak. He knew how to deal with it. And so he really got a result. And then people that were not really used to playing games, there was some sort of investment cost, right? In the beginning, it went like, oh no, oof, the block falls, things like that. But they quickly learned the mechanics. And then, of course, because they were, most of them were at that time smarter than my son was, they could easier move around and do the data thing. And so in the end, we really got good result. And so every now and then we try to use the new tool or the new demo or to go back to the question, right? And so then we have slow digital art history, but we also have proper human-computer interaction research. Because one of the things that we, or that I always felt was important, is we are not creating a new encyclopedia of 17th century artistic communities in Flanders and or the Netherlands. It's too much work. What we are trying to do is we try to model things, right? And then invite computer scientists, and they have their own set of questions. They have their own agenda, so to speak. They want to do things, and we try to find each other as much as possible. And the development of tools and the development of and the testing of all these tools, that gave them ways to publish their results. So there was always the what's in it for me. That's important if you do this kind of research. It's not like us art historians telling the technicians how they have to do it. The project that Christian was referring to, we saw how that went, right? We had these magnificent ideas, and then they hired a tech person, and they were going to do the database, but that's not how it works, right? You need to know what they are doing, how they are doing it, and they want to know what we are doing and how we want to do it. And we need to have this kind of conversation going on. And so, getting close to the end of my presentation already. So just a couple of things that we managed to do. And again, it's not about us doing a database for the next generations and then the first server thing happens and poof, the database disappears. We wanted to publish. We wanted to publish things, right? Because for the young people is important for the careers, of course, but also, and that's really important, I think, we also wanted to have as many publications as possible because we thought that, we believed that, okay, the people in art history should know about us and they read, right? They don't necessarily, well, they also do that, but I mean, they want to read things, they want to understand our process, they want to understand what's behind the database, and then of course the people from computer science want to do the same. So we published quite a bit, I think, and also the article on the left, it was one of the first things I did because we finally got somewhere. That was published in 2016, I now see, in the Zeitschrift für Kunstgeschichte. I don't think that's the most digitally minded journal, and especially not in 2016. I can say that, right? And I'm sorry for the editors. You have no, but I mean, there was a lot of brief, but in the end, they decided to go ahead and publish it, right? And most of for the years thereafter, people usually, found us through that publication because it's a widely read, very famous international journal. And so Clara and Astrid worked on that mostly, so as art historians. And what they focused on networks, right? Social and professional networks. And they found a couple of really interesting things by doing a lot of data stuff, data-driven, chercher la femme. So basically, finally, for the very first time ever in the history of tapestry history, we now have names of women that were really important to sustain and develop the industries in Antwerp and Brussels. And that's because if you do that kind of research, it's data first, questions later, right? You don't go to the archive saying that I want to know everything about Willem van Leeuwendaal as Willem van Leeuwendaal. No, you're saying, okay, Willem van Leeuwendaal is part of a context of dynamic, social dynamics. Let's see who and what's going on around Willem van Leeuwendaal as well. So that was one of the things I did. And then also, and these are the three visualizations you see on the lower half. These are godparenthood networks between, not between, in Brussels and Antwerp. So Brussels, Antwerp always, right? And yeah, sort of snapshot, 1620, 1640, 1640, 1660, 1660, 1680. The dates are not randomly chosen. It has to do with the history of tapestry in Europe, right? And you see that in the first window, there are no godparenthood networks ties between these two cities, right? That's why I drew the red line. And then suddenly, mid-17th century, woohoo, they mingled, right? And a lot. And then near the end of the 17th century, these two production centers basically drifted apart again. And that helps a lot to rethink what kind of questions we as art historians with a very 19th century way of thinking are even allowed to ask tapestries, right? Because we want to attribute and date. We want to put it in boxes and in lists, etc., etc. There's a dynamic, there's a social dynamic, which means that if you try to understand a mid-17th century Flemish tapestry, let's call it like that, then it doesn't even make sense to ask the question, is this made in Antwerp or made in Brussels? Because it is possible that Antwerp weavers came to Brussels, it's possible that Brussels weavers went to Antwerp, it's possible that they changed cartoons, it's possible that, because there were so many social but also professional ties. See, it's another way to think about what we try to achieve or what kind of questions we can ask. And then Jos and Ines focused on the communities of painters. Was also really fun, I think, because the distant viewing helped us to rethink traditional assumptions, as in, oh, from 1650 nobody cared about Antwerp anymore, and all the painters disappeared, etc. We have a small number of large workshops because that happens when the production goes down. It's completely not true, basically. Also the importance of academies, right? They established academies. Also that was basically in Antwerp and also in Brussels, that was basically, and it was in Brussels first, by the way, there was a strategy, it was a means, and it was a strategy developed by all the guild masters to get more apprentices coming to the guild. These were not competitive bodies in any way. It was just something they did to attract students. Yeah, and then support and guide attribution and dating of paintings, definitely. So what we all know, what happened, somebody publishes a paper in 1892 about the Brussels landscape painter based on a painting with two paintings with a signature, and then suddenly a lot of art historians start to publish, right, on that painter because he's there visible, and other people go to the museum. Oh, that might also be this painter, etc., etc. And so suddenly you get a whole body of paintings attributed to a painter. And then things get murky because at one point people start to realize, yeah, we attributed all this paint, but that's not really, you know what? That's his early phase, things like that. Or that must have been when he suddenly got a bit tired, and that's why the brush strokes are different. And then if you do the distant view and you sort of map, or if you do the profile of this very famous painter that has so much publications, right? Then you see suddenly other people in the guild that have very similar professional profiles. Same number of apprentices, same number of success rate with these apprentices, same career path, as in, oh, apprentices, no apprentices, or oh, dean of the... So people that were basically, based on the archival records, doing very similar things apparently, and were equally successful or unsuccessful. And then suddenly you can sort of redirect connoisseurs to other painters that have never been studied that much. So basically, that was very fun. And then, yeah, so the computer scientists, again, they did a lot of fun things. They also published a lot of, because they have to publish even more than art historians do. And they simply, poof, they do it. They usually write the article in 15 minutes because they don't care about what happened in 1920, and there was this very famous but obscure art theoretician, and so you have to footnote that person, and then you sort of, they really don't care. What is the latest publication based on gamification? 3 papers, and then they describe their methodology, they describe the results, and then further avenues of research. That's the paper. Quite jealous how they did it. You know? Also, when they do a grant proposal, a week tops. If you don't know it in a week, then basically it's not even worth pursuing. The whole thing? Okay. Wait, then I'll put back the book so that I can take them out. Oh. You just
put it on the side because you will make a mess.
Yeah, that's what I usually do. Hello. So we're going to go back to the first slide and for you, right? No, no. Yeah, I'm almost finished, I think. But anyway, so that was great fun. But also what we try to do is to, and especially for them, of course, it was really important to think about scalability of things, because that's what they do, right? They develop the demo, they test, it works, and then they have to sort of help other computer scientists understand that if they want to do something similar, that they should fall back on that work because that work is actually scalable. So, digital humanities. I've made sure to avoid the word as long as possible because I'm not a big believer in digital humanities because it's too easy. And it's too easy for the traditional humanities scholars because that means that just like digital art history is also problematic, I think, in a sense, because it sort of gives traditional art historians the freedom to say it's very completely different. We're not doing that, but that's okay. It's just a turn, right? That's what we usually do in art history. We turn. New turn each and every day. So exhausting. While the digital is not a turn, it's there and it's there to be used in all kinds of turns. Depending on, again, do you use the... Okay. But yeah, it's digital humanities because it embraces both disciplines, art history and computer science. Not computer science, human-computer interaction research. That's a different thing. Because we usually say computer science when we mean human-computer interaction research or data analytics or AI research in the near future. It's not computer science. It is computer science, but I mean, it's different. And once you know how that works, then it's easier to have a meaningful conversation with them, right? I think this was the last slide. Yep. So, questions and or without.
Yeah, I meant to say also for the people online that you actually can put your questions into the chat and we will somehow manage to read it out to you, somehow magically. But yeah, let me ask first actually a question because thank you for the presentation, but what I was missing a little bit is what in the papers that you and your team have published, I always find highly interesting because you describe what happens to get from the documents from the archival resources to the database and what happens in between in terms of missing data. How do you deal with missing data, with ambiguities and all the issues that we start thinking about when we do digital as art historians, confirmation bias and whatever biases. Can't read. We should sit. But how does it work with the mic?
Then we take the mic, right?
Okay.
It's just, oh, I don't need to do it. Okay.
So big question, but I think it's a lot in the publications and skipped that part tonight.
Yeah, it was one of the it was a cliffhanger actually, because I was hoping that it would turn up in the conversation.
Sorry. Okay, I spoiled your cliffhanger.
No. You reminded me of the cliffhanger because I forgot about it.
Okay.
That's what happens then. No, yeah. So the thing is, if you do, I mean, the slow digital art history, it sort of gave me more than once an existential crisis, as in, that's the thing with data-driven art history, and especially if you do data-driven art history on a period where the data is really problematic in many ways. Now we have the data, the contemporary data is also problematic in many ways, but then problematic as in not everything has been written down, right? You need to acknowledge that. Not everything that has been written down has been preserved. To acknowledge that. Not everything that has been written down is honest. It might have been written down for a reason, and especially very special reason. Not everything that has been written down is readable. Not everything that has been written down makes sense because something else has also been written down and sort of contradicts. So, and these were problems that I never really experienced when I did the traditional art history, because you sort of weren't really interested in that. You find something and you say, okay, you can use it. And so the thing is that the moment we started to realize that, oh, shoot, it is impossible to do art history, as in factual, data-driven art history, then we said, okay, no, we have to simply embrace it. And we try to find ways, and also in the on the website with the web browser, we try to find ways to make it as clear as possible to the users that the data set is basically a mess again. It's not a mess because it's well organized and well structured, but you cannot simply accept it that it will give you what you need, right? And so what we did, for example, we had the ambiguation or the disambiguation tool. So if you type in a name like Wittebrood, yeah, in the 17th century, that could have been written in so many ways. And also, depending on where it was written, the Antwerp accent and the Brussels accent is really different. It was, and it still is. And I could say like, Fabreux. And so we sort of programmed, if you do the search thing, then you get a lot of sound. Or perhaps you are looking for this person. So that was one way to deal with. Then we tried, and at one point we collaborated with biostatisticians, right, to impute missing data. And they got a paper out of it that is really about statistics, but it wasn't really helpful. Helped us to, but then we found it difficult to how to make that clear to users that the data is not, it's imputed, right? That should have been or could have been another sort of subset then, but that was a bit tricky, and also the money ran out. But then we decided to be honest, right? We say, yeah, not applicable, or we don't know, basically. So it's, and also with the network tool, the family network kind of tool, it's simply saying that, yes, you can see something that's happening in 1645, but basically your guess is as good as ours because it's only 2 or 3 data points. That's all there is. So yeah, no. So basically, that's a big lesson. It's one of the things I've learned, that what we usually do when we do archival research, it's completely the opposite of trying to grasp what was happening in the back then. And also just the fact that so much has not been written down, but it can be sort of interfered from circumstantial evidence. Like if you're close friends, good friends, then you don't necessarily go to a notary each and every day to write down what you are doing together, because you trust each other. If for some reason you have a huge fight with your neighbor, right? Who knows? If it was never really written down that there was a fight, then usually a conflict gets a record. So if you want to become well known in 2090 or 2130 or whatever, make a lot of lawsuits, because these are written down perfectly. It's amazing. So that's a big tip. That's also a takeaway.
No, I mean, I really found it so fascinating because I never thought about it. But in tapestries, it's very much, as you said, it's ties, it's people that come together, women and relatives. It's a lot about family ties, and precisely that these family ties that are often so important for the production they are not formalized because you don't make contracts with your wife or with your brother. So the closest ties are actually not written down. And I think it's intellectually really interesting to think about our documents that we are using all the time. But are there any other questions? Yeah.
Thank you very much for the wonderful insight. It's really exciting. I was wondering, how many people did you find in total in your network, and do you think this is in any way representative? And actually, I have a lot of questions. I'll try to move on them. And what was your experience regarding control vocabularies and the linkage to a party files? And on the last slide, since you we're particularly talking about digital humanities, and now there's also been the term of computation and make it more different. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I always try to go from the last to the first because I already forgot the first anyway. So yeah, digital computational. I think computational might be better sometimes. This is more computational than digital, I think, because you use computational power, right? Because to visualize and to analyze, you need computing power. So it is more, and of course, most of our computers nowadays are digital computers, but we also have quantum computers coming up, right? So I think then computational might perhaps be a little bit better than digital, because digital art history is also digital art, the history of digital art, So, but it's just, I think it's, in a way, it is important to think about that, but yeah, it brings us to the second question. What term do we use, right? What do I need to?
We should have repeated the question because online.
I'm sorry. So the last question was digital humanities or digital art history versus computational or digital art history. So is it digital and or computational then? But I think they got the response, right? Okay, great. So what words do we use, right? So I think, but I'm not working in a museum. So I really don't believe in authority as such. And I think that standards, right? That's like a toothbrush. Everybody needs it, everybody uses it, but you don't necessarily use the toothbrush of a friend, right? I don't know your personal hygiene habits, but I don't do it. Oh, yes, that's not something we are going to do, right? So, of course, when we started the project, there was this whole idea that linked open data was going to make our Rubens linked to the Rubens of the Getty, and then possibly to all the other Rubenses that are in museum collections, etc., etc. And it was really so when I said linked open data, that might help us too, right? So two computer scientists independently said, what? Linked open data is a theoretical model that we published in the early 90s. What are you doing that? It's not even possible, right? And I said, so yeah, that's a thing. It's our Rubens, the other Rubens. And I think, and hopefully with the AI thing, right? Something we tried to do at one point. We tried to say that, but that failed because we have a lot of failed experiments. And usually the failure is because of time, as in money, right? It's not that it is to have a machine that we trained a model so that if a Rubens in the Getty database, right? And a Rubens, because we might have more than one, is in a couple of instances very close to each other, as in same birth year or something like that, that there was a probability that this Rubens was the other Rubens, and to show that in the database. And it's not simply that this is this, no, that you again show you're not completely sure because it's the 17th century, and unfortunately what we have is what we have, and we cannot really make sure. So to train it.
But it's because you questioned authority. I still remember that the head of the Getty vocabulary is Martha Barker, was always saying, although we call it ULAN Artist Authority, we don't actually mean that you have to name it the way we name it. It's just about clustering variant names in a variety of languages, and also perhaps false ones that are close by and are used in the literature or no longer used. I think it's about clustering, it's not about authority.
No, okay, yeah, but then a lot of art historians want to have it, because if it's digital, then it is binary, so then it needs to be
0 or 1.
0, 1. While that's exactly what, the authority and also what we're trying to do. It's not 0, 1. It's possible that they are similar or identical. Sorry, not similar. They are similar and possibly identical. That was that. And then the first question was how many people? Yeah. Oh, I think in the end we had about 150,000. No, 130,000 people. Yeah, but a lot of them were simply a name and then question mark, because what we did is we went through a lot of serial archives like baptism records, and so some of these names, because that's what people did, right? They named their child, they gave the child the same name as the father or the grandfather or the godfather. So it's amazing how many Jan van Leefdalen we have. And sometimes they were very close in birth year, right? And sometimes they were still alive and they were 45, and we simply assumed that if you found Jan van Leefdalen in a document that it must have been a tapestry, possibly not. Or, yeah.
A really distinct feature also of your project is that you went so systematically through archival documents and would not take anything from other secondary literature, right?
Yeah, I can.
But a lot of people would say, isn't that just a waste of time if you have so many names that you cannot really work it, and that makes you actually slow and you are wasting resources, because you should first have your research question and then keep out everything that does not address your research question. I mean, I had this commentary.
Yeah, I know.
And we discussed this yesterday too, because in your publications, you never really completely explain why slow digital art history. And I really have to bring this in connection to neoliberal thinking and capitalism, because we are always aware of the limits of resources and costs, and where do we invest your time and the time of your students and the time of your computer scientists? It is crucial for institutions, and so it makes it slow, but then
But slow is it was basically when I started to do computational art history, right? I got a lot of pushback, and especially at Leuven University, where the professors were not necessarily digitally minded, right? And they felt that doing the computer stuff is fast, because that's how you interact with the digital, right? If you have to wait 3 minutes for the AI to read 600 papers and to present a report, and you were like 3 minutes. While, I mean, it's simply mind-blowing what a machine does. So the whole idea of how you perceive time is very different when you interact with a machine. And fast was also used to describe analogy with fast food, right? So you take it, you use it, but you are not necessarily sure where it comes from. And also, you're feeling hungry again after 15 minutes because and this was actually a lot of these first generation databases, and very like the Ecartico database, for example. So you pushed in a name and it said, okay, this is this, and poof, and you got a network visualization. But there was no way to reconnect to the sources. So it went fast, but that was not what we were trying to do. We wanted to go slow and think about what is data anyway, and what kind of questions can we ask, should we ask? So that is, and then means, and the thing is, it was not about building an infrastructure or building, it was about getting things published. So that was, we really worked hard and we really worked fast, right? So we managed to get a lot of publications. out of that. So yes, the university and the Science Foundation, they said, great, this is a great way to use taxpayers' money, because in the end it's taxpayers' money. And it's not about keeping the database alive and up and running. It's about, okay, this is what we and this is what people learn from doing this kind of research. Hopefully, if people would read the essays or the articles, they would think twice, perhaps 3 times, before they say, I'm going to do a database. Because basically, if you read the articles, I'm saying that, really? Because it takes time and it takes energy and it takes a lot of thinking power. And then you can start to do a database. And of course, a database is a database. If you do 3 names on a Word document, that's a database. So it depends on the level of database-like thinking you want to do.
Yeah, it's a lot. I mean, it's interesting that you focus on publications and research, but often if you go into early digital art history, say like 80s, you read all the time automation, because there was this idea that you can do things faster, more efficient than humans can do it. And a lot of the framework of AI is also that it's more efficient and you don't waste time and so on. But other questions? Yeah,
I'm interested in the interdisciplinary collaboration aspect, because I think this is something we all deal with. And from what I've heard, in the first project, you were not so happy how it worked out, the interdisciplinary collaboration. Now for the project you presented, you kind of included the learnings, for example, managing expectations and to make clear what everyone wants to get out in publications, for example, but maybe you have more tips and tricks how to make these interdisciplinary collaborations work.
First of all, I think we have to be humble when we try to connect to another discipline. And also, and especially if you go from the humanities to the sciences, right? Yesterday I gave the example of if you're having dinner and you're sitting next to an engineer and you're quoting Shakespeare, then you feel that, okay, look at me, social capital, cultural capital, right? And the engineer will go, oh. But the engineer knows a lot that you don't know. And of course, it's not really fun to quote Shakespeare. It's not really fun to quote a mathematical formula at dinner. So the engineer feels like, oh. And so there is this idea that we have this deeper connection to reality somehow, and they are problem solvers, right? You are problem bringers and they are problem solvers. And that's completely not the case. So first of all, be humble and realize that they have a lot of interesting questions from their discipline that they want to ask and test for art history, for example. And they're willing and far more accepting than art historian, in my experience. And that's a great thing about learning university. I take my bicycle, 10 minutes, and I'm on the technology campus, saying, oh, I have this and this. Oh, really? Oh, that's really interesting. And they start to have the conversation. So that's really important. They are there to help us, and they're interested because they also want to test their tools and algorithms by using. So that's great. So they are willing. And then you have to make the effort, right? You need to have, let's call it the beer mat knowledge, right? If you go out, I mean, in Belgium, we have a lot of, where you have the little mat, right? If you're sitting at a bar and you put a glass on the beer. And so the beer mat is a really nice analogy because it sort of, the wetness of the glass sort of becomes a really mushy, and the other person, so that's the beer mat. So you need to know a little bit about, you don't need to know about, but you need to know what a language model is, right? If you want to do it, and especially nowadays, if you want to do digital art history or computation, you have to read, and you have to really think about, what am I trying to understand here? What kind of technologies, what kind of form, what kind of coding, what kind of language do they speak? So you have to read, and also you have to read articles that are not necessarily of direct interest to you, but you have to read so that that you can have the conversation, right? And I think in the past that not always happened. And then I think you have a lot of institutions, not looking at the Belvedere right now, I'm not looking at any, but let's say that in Belgium, we have a couple of museums with really crappy data and application infrastructure. And that's because there wasn't a fruitful conversation. Oh, we need a database. Oh yeah, I know somebody. He has a website design company. Yeah, let's bring him in. And then suddenly there's a website, but it doesn't really do. And then, oh yeah, we need to have a database. Somebody has an Excel sheet lying around. This is the model we are going to use. And then, hoopa. And that's how it went in the past. So we are still dealing with a lot of unwillingness to participate in the technology dimension because people felt it's beyond. Like you were saying, it's technicians, right? The minions are doing all the coding and all the hard work for us. And we bring meaning to the world.
They're not just the service providers. Yeah. I think it needs to be a discussion on eye level, and you have to take seriously also the developer and whoever is involved. They also want to learn something and get something out. It's not just done for the sake of art historians having results. But Richard, you also had a question or a comment?
There were more questions on the method of cooperation and working together.
Yeah.
Methods of cooperation. Yeah. I'm supposed to repeat the question.
Okay. Oh yeah. Sorry. Method. So basically, put in the effort, as in spend time with the people you work with. Go out, have a coffee, have a drink, and then best method always. You have to keep the beer mat wet, right?
Yeah.
But also spend time in front of a whiteboard. I'm a big believer with a couple of people. I'm a big believer in whiteboarding.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, you know. And flip charts.
For both disciplines.
You bring them together in one room and you say, I have a very specific question or problem that I would like to ask. I'm thinking of, the problem is nobody wants to write SQL queries. You lock the door, you throw away the key, and you say, okay, in 4 hours' time, you need to have the whiteboard filled with ideas and possible. And then you simply go back and forth, and then again, you need to be humble and also open for criticism. As in, you have to say what you mean, and you mean what you say then, because that is the way to go forward. And I think this kind of really, and then sometimes it takes ages, right? It's not that you have the solution in 4 hours. Then you need to leave the room because the body orders. But then you go out and then you have a coffee. And then usually, okay, let's have lunch together. And then just walking from the building to the place where you have lunch, and then you have lunch, and then suddenly you say, oh, but perhaps this. And before you know it, you're back in the same room with people. Or you try and you try again, and you fail again. And then you say, okay, that's not something we're going to pursue because it's not what we want to do. And make it visible what you're doing. That's also a nice way to interact with people from different disciplines. Show them what a book is, right? What a catalogue raisonné is. They don't know what a catalogue raisonné is. And that's fine because we don't know the true meaning of quantum entanglement, right? So it's fine. They don't need to know that, but show them. Take them to art history lessons, also very nice. And vice versa. Go to one of their classes or a couple of their classes. And then you build trust and then you build fruitful collaborations. But that takes time, of course. Yeah. And don't ask them to do something. As in, this is my solution to the problem. No, I have a problem and let's work together on the solution.
You finance put the question how to finance these projects,
yeah.
How they could be financed.
Yeah.
How do you finance
third-party funding, or because what I experience is you can get third-party funding, and you have a research question, and you must have the art historical research question for it, and then probably a methodological question as well.
Yeah.
And once the communication is described it as an ideal does not work, then you will not have any results. No party will be satisfied. However, after, I don't know, a certain period of time, the project will be finished, there will be no more funding. And which also touches another question is the selection of data from archive you are looking into. because I'm absolutely with you that with our classical research question from art history, we just a tiny little selection of data which could be found in archives, but obviously you have the possibility to have a broad range and starting from scratch, like something like what is in English Grundlagenforschung?
Foundational
basic research.
Yeah, foundational research.
So, but how did you? It's not actually not just as much about financing, but the organization and the budget for your different, because this will have had preparatory projects.
Yeah.
Could you?
Yeah.
This is something.
It's a very important question. It's a very important question. So thank you. Yeah. So basically, the question was about finding funds to do this kind of research, but then also how to manage budgets and how to make sure that the funding agencies are happy, possibly, and what do you do when the money runs up, right? Dries up. So finding.
And also the question, I think, because you stressed, and I like that very much, we find the questions in the data.
Yeah.
Is that feasible for third-party funding?
Yeah. So I was fortunate enough to develop a career as a traditional tapestry scholar before I even started to think about computational art history, meaning that my track record, right, was okay the moment I started to think about, okay, now I need to really use the computer. Okay, so then, and what I then did is try to do a couple of proof of concepts again with people at the university, so that I could start to do apply for funding within the university, the research fund of the university, but also with the Flemish Science Foundation, right? That's the national, the regional in Belgium. It's complicated, but so it's the Science Foundation. And then, and I think now I understand what the question with the first generation that you were not. So the first generation was more traditional than computational because of exactly that. I knew that at the time I was also myself a member of the expert panel evaluating applications. So I really understood that, the moment there is electricity, people go like, it's not humanities, right? It needs to be theoretical. So I was familiar with how people looked at this kind of applications. It took a couple of efforts, right? But I never really decided to be too pragmatic about it. I always, and at one point it simply started off. And the moment, and that's how it goes in academia, the moment you have money, it's easier to get more money. And especially if you publish. So that it becomes clear to the funding agency that, that was a little bit strange, or that's not perhaps, but at least there are publications, there are dissertations coming out of the project. The person is visible in the international literature. I went to a lot of symposia trying to convince people, etc., etc. So that was really hard work. And that allowed me to get an additional round of funding with the Science Foundation and also within the university. I will always complain about working at the university, but at the same time, it's brilliant, because if you make the effort, if you manage to bring the best out of young people and they publish and work together, then the university and the science foundation will, in the end, always acknowledge that and reward you for that. That being said, it was a lot of work to convince and reconvince, of course. I also made sure to keep it as not comprehensive, as coherent as possible, because that's what happened. People are usually slave to their ambition, right? And now I'm going to apply for European funding, and now I need to grow, and now I need to reach out. At one point I felt, I know what I wanted to get out of the project, and I think we are getting there. Fine, let's do something else within a couple of years. And then we even have a publication about the satellites, and the moment you start to realize that, or you simply take them out of the air, the things that you were putting online, for example. And then you do one final publication, where you talk about sustainability, where you talk about the problems of financing things. So to me, it was never a problem that it was going to end, because I knew it was going to end anyway, which is very different, I think, in a museum or in other institutions where you want to build something that is sustainable, right? I never really cared about sustainability in that sense. I cared about lessons learned through publications. I don't know if that really answers your question.
Well, it's interesting because I've got the idea that we need to collect data digitally to make data available,
yeah,
to make it connectable.
Absolutely.
And so whenever all the data you've obviously collected and worked on will be accessible, or might will be accessible in the future, and it will be enriched by other data. Yeah? So this is the question, a certain continuity. And obviously the advantage or the positive aspect of your projects from the basis is that you did general research in archives, like obviously looking for names and then biographical data. I will ask the question later, which kind of data.
Yeah.
And you went through a range of different types of sources which you collected. And it's always difficult because it is an archive of holdings never aimed. So this is the question how and for the classical research projects, if you apply for funding, then people want to know exactly what parts in the archive you will be looking at, whether you will be able to realize what you proposed, what you've promised. This is an aspect,
No, the feasibility, basically, if you apply for funding, was part of the question. How can you balance between this is what I'm going to find and this is the result I will be getting, versus I'm really not sure what I'm trying to find, but let's give us money to see what's happening, right? So that was a bit of both, but then again, thanks to my track record, I knew the archives from the traditional stuff. And so if I wrote in the application, I'm going to try and we're going to explore this or this collection, archival collection. It was credible, and people realized, oh, okay, he knows what he's talking about. So that was that. Then the matter of, you're absolutely right. And when we did the project, I think Transcribus, right, was in the early stages, or at least I was late in discovering it. But Transcribus is really a great tool. There's also AI. Right? You put in the archival record and the machine trains itself on the handwriting, and basically you get the result. And then if you do, then you can extract all the names, and you can sort of automatically, right, go from the photo of the archive to the cell, all the names in the little cells, and then all the relations that are even identified. And I realized that, oh, this is going to happen. So perhaps we shouldn't care too much about doing it ourselves, right? Because we never wanted to be complete or encyclopedic anyway. So, okay, what we did is I think that was going to be a question, or also part of the question perhaps. So in the beginning we said, okay, archival collections, what do we have? Baptism records, marriage. That gives us relational data, baptism, marriage, and then burials, right? That's parish records, basically. What else do we have? We don't have guild. We don't have the tapestry guild. All the records have disappeared, so we don't have membership lists. But we have membership lists, Brussels and Antwerp painters, 17th century. It was a neat collection, right? Because it's well structured. And unfortunately, we had to do it still manually, so to speak. But that would be a great thing to do automatically, or to let it, because it's well structured, also the baptism records. So that, and then I did a lot of research in the notary records, right? Because it's a wealth of crazy things that are happening in notary documents. It's trying to, well, drafting a contract to collaborate on a tapestry set, but also renting, leasing, buying houses, renovating houses. So a lot of things are happening in these notary records. And then we said, okay, we're going to see what types of transactions, what kind of social dynamics are happening in these archival notary documents. And to see if the data model could absorb all these different kinds of connections and activities. A witness to a will, for example. In the same document, to a will, to a testament. So in the same, so you just a testament or the will, you don't have a lot of people necessarily, but you have lots of crazy things going on in a testament. Because it also relates to sometimes to places or houses that they owned, right? And then suddenly they were giving that to somebody who is not even on our radar. And then that person gets not one, but 2 or 3 houses suddenly. Oh, what's happening there? But it's very possible that in another notary document that you found that people were in debt, right? And that giving the house was not because they liked each other, but it was one way to settle the debt. And so that was really, but again, and that's why it's slow digital art history, going back to the data, going back to how we could code certain ties or certain documents. And again, to help people understand it, if you want to do a database, then you have to be careful what kind of types of documents do you collect. But so the serial data, like membership lists, yeah, also of these Rederijkerskamers, so the Chamber of Rhetorics, things like that, sociability, of course, different professionals, different professions coming together, because a membership list of the Guild of St. Luke, painters, and possibly some other, but that's bleeding obvious that you will find artists in the list of, and these social groups, that was sometimes surprising. For the young researchers, and then I think that was one of the things that I did best in the project, based on experience, based on traditional art historical experience and knowledge about the sources and what you can get out of it, was helping them to define a subset or a couple of subsets that they could use to address the research question. And that sometimes might have been a little bit pragmatic, right? If the document doesn't, if the group of documents is silent before 1620, yeah, forget about it, right? You don't have to, don't go to another archive, don't open up all the possible boxes that you might find where possibly there is a document that, because the one document is not going to change anything. So that was me trying to sort of make it as effective as possible then. So there is more, we did a lot, and that was what I felt really interesting, together with the philosopher, right? Thinking about data, thinking about knowledge, what can we ask, what do we know, and how there's all these different relics from the past, right? What kind of sociability, what's happening there? What can we know, what do we know, and how much contemporary things do we project on 17th century documents? It's also a very important question. And so then again, you go home and you think, oh, so depressing. Because
on that note, we should actually stop.
Absolutely.
Depressing. This time is actually very advanced, and I think we will have a way to informally continue some of the conversations. I think there are no questions in the chat, so yeah, thanks everybody for coming, joining us tonight, and yeah, please come again next time on June 12th, I think. Yeah, have a good evening and